How will the Ukraine war end? The world has been witnessing the war in Ukraine for the past few months. It's extremely disheartening to see pictures of destruction, death, and refugee camps every day on the news. We all hope that this war will come to an end soon. The question is, how will this war in Ukraine end? There are three possible scenarios. 1. A total victory for Russia. 2. A clear defeat for Russia. 3. Neither side has a decisive victory. Nobody is sure where the war is heading at any given time. It does appear that Russia is making steady progress in occupying more and more territory in the eastern Ukraine, mainly in the Donbas region, with their capture of Mariupol, and attempts to do the same in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. However, the news that comes out of Ukraine has a strong media bias. The Russian media is heavily censored, trying to show minimal losses to Russian soldiers, as well as civilian deaths in Ukraine, so that the Russian citizens act in solidarity, in their support of their military operation. The Western news media has a heavy bias, in exaggerating the claims on any Ukrainian battle victories, as well as their resistance, along with minimizing any Russian victory. Even the destruction to buildings, and the tragedy of human losses, are used to stoke the emotions of the average viewer. Will the current Russian victories in some parts of Ukraine lead to a complete Russian control of the eastern and southern region of Ukraine? If that happens, will it lead to a Ukrainian surrender? Nobody knows for sure, but we'll cover all the scenarios. Let's analyze the consequences of each of the three outcomes listed earlier, as well as the likelihood of each outcome. First, let's say Russia has a decisive and total victory over Ukraine. It doesn't mean that the capital of Kyiv will fall. It just means Ukraine may not have the capacity, in terms of men, material, or other resources, to continue the war beyond a certain point. Such an event can happen when all the assistance provided by the West, including the United States and NATO, is not enough to keep the Ukrainian soldiers resist the Russian onslaught. This outcome is possible, but appears highly unlikely. Ukraine is suffering heavy losses, but it's supported by the West on several fronts. However, we'll analyze what will happen if Russia actually has a clear victory. In that case, Russia will make heavy demands from Ukraine, which it may be forced to do, having lost the war. The demands may include giving a permanent guarantee to Russia that Ukraine will not join the NATO, either through a bilateral assurance, or by changing its constitution. In fact, this was a demand that was put forward by Russia, when the Russian and Ukrainian officials negotiated, during the first few weeks, after the war started. Russia may demand Ukraine recognize the two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, as independent, and formally accept Crimea, as part of Russia, which was annexed by Russia, in 2014. In addition to all this, Russia will definitely want all the sanctions to be lifted by the Western nations, that were imposed, and status quo ante restored. We told you a clear Russian victory is unlikely. You may wonder why we think so. At this time, Western Europe, including France, Germany, United Kingdom, as well as the United States, Australia, and Japan, are heavily interested in ensuring that Russia will not have the ability to finance the war for a long time, using their crippling sanctions. Any clear victory for Russia also emboldens China to take an aggressive stand, or even invade Taiwan. So, the nations that support Ukraine have a vested interest, and are working aggressively to ensure Russia doesn't come out as a clear winner. That brings us to the next possible outcome. What about Russia suffering a clear defeat? That's even more unlikely, and we'll explain the reasons in a short while. Let's look at the scenario anyway. In a clear Russian defeat, Russia will be forced to give up all its occupations and annexations, including Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014, though not recognized by many nations. It's possible, but unlikely, Russia will be able to bear the cost of the damages to Ukraine. Even though the West may not directly intervene in the political landscape of Russia, it may enforce fundamental political reforms that may change the structure of Russian politics forever. But, why did we feel that this scenario is even more unlikely? Because Russia is not a pushover militarily. Though Russia is not economically strong, and it has not been spending nearly as much as the United States or China on its military budget, Russia still has some of the most advanced weapons, both conventional and nuclear. Russia also has an agile air force, which boasts of a range of fifth-generation aircrafts, and the hypersonic fighters, for which there is no effective anti-aircraft missile system yet. In the event of a looming defeat, Russia may unleash a series of its advanced weapons, possibly nuclear too, causing unimaginable damage to lives and property. Given the fact that we believe that both an outright Russian victory and a clear Russian defeat are both highly unlikely, we need to look at the third possibility, wherein neither Russia nor Ukraine is able to win outright. Russia may declare that their military objectives have been achieved after a certain level of territorial annexation, and declare a ceasefire, and it's also possible that either Russia or Ukraine is forced by circumstances to propose a ceasefire, followed by negotiations, and an eventual end to the war. This may sound like the best possible outcome, given the pain and suffering we see every day in the media. The unknown here is, how quickly is the ceasefire likely to happen? In any war, there is always a threshold up to which the parties can withstand their losses. Usually, the first one who gives in will end up giving more concessions during the negotiations, but the circumstances may push them into it. There are many reasons why Russia may give in. The financial and human resources are limited on the Russian side, and even China doesn't seem to have an interest to aid Russia financially, at least for now. Of course, Ukraine has even more reasons to give in as well. The country is literally at a standstill, with many of its day-to-day functions blocked, with millions of its people out of the country, and living as refugees. This status quo is not sustainable for too long, both for Ukraine and the nations that host the refugees. The world is dependent on the food grains produced in Russia and Ukraine, apart from the oil, gas, and fertilizers exported from Russia. All of these exports are currently limited, and the inflation has skyrocketed all over the world. So, everybody has an interest to see this war come to a conclusion. The negotiations are not going to be easy though. The Western nations, including the United States, will likely want to see a weakened, or friendly Russia, or both, as the combined threat of China and Russia would have significantly reduced, if Russia is so weak, or turn closer to the West. Russia on the other hand, would want the sanctions be lifted, pipeline projects like Nord Stream restarted, Western businesses re-enter, as well as be accepted back into the international banking system, SWIFT. Russia may also want all nations to recognize Crimea as part of Russian territory, and even some of the newly occupied Ukrainian territories. Just like a war, which can take a life of its own, and take unpredictable trajectory, negotiations or its outcome, can be unpredictable too. If things go well, the negotiations can be fast, delivering peace to both Russia and Ukraine. It's also likely that the negotiations can be long drawn, and frustrating. Though Ukraine is the party that will be on the negotiating table, it's the West that lays the conditions on what is acceptable, and what is not. The Western nations are divided currently into two camps, a Dove camp, and a Hawk camp. The Dove camp wants negotiations to move fast, sanctions on Russia lifted quickly, and Ukrainians move back to their land, and get back into their old routine again. The Hawk camp wants peace as well, but want Russia to pay a heavy price for it. They want Russia bear the cost, at least partially, for the reconstruction of Ukrainian cities destroyed in the war. They also want to lift sanctions on Russia, on a phased manner, to ensure that Russia comply with the terms of the agreement to be signed, as part of the official end to the war. The negotiations can have other challenges too. If one or both parties suspect that the other party is using the negotiations as a ploy to buy time for a larger offense, the negotiations can break down as well. In such a scenario, the war can restart and enter into a new phase, with more neighbors joining in, and has a serious potential to become a global war, or World War III. We can only hope that such scenarios don't play out, and the eventual end to the war is long-lasting, and provides peace to all parties concerned and the world at large. Thanks for watching.